Okay, we are live. All right, and we'll start the recording. There we go. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the third day of the inaugural UConn Human Rights Symposium. We hope you've been enjoying the day's events on immigration and the refugee crisis. My name is Irene Soteriou, and I'm our founder and president. I'm joined now by William Tong, the 25th and current Attorney General of Connecticut. A graduate of Brown and the University of Chicago Law School, William Tong took office in January of 2019 as the first Asian Pacific American Attorney General and constitutional officer elected statewide in Connecticut's history. During the 12 years in the legislature, he served as House Chair and of the Judiciary Committee, and championed laws promoting gun safety, criminal justice reform, and consumer rights. Since being elected Attorney General in 2018, William Tong has been a national leader on numerous issues. Notably, he leads a coalition of 51 state and territorial attorney generals in a price-fixing lawsuit against large pharmaceutical companies. He also has been out front on action to defend women's rights, healthcare, the LGBTQ community, and, of course, the rights of immigrants. In January of 2021, he joined a coalition of 14 attorney generals supporting Washington State's fight to halt ICE arrests of immigrants in and around state courthouses. Mr. Tong, what a pleasure and an honor to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Irene. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful. So, Mr. Tong, as you know, we have a live audience with us today, and I'm really already noticing that a number of the questions that are coming in converge on the topic of your work with immigration. Could you tell our viewers a bit about what originally motivated you to pursue the immigration work that you have, and then give us a little bit of background on the work itself?
Thank you, Irene. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to look at you and not into the little black hole that it's
Sounds
the camera.
good, yes.
So
Much
people,
natural.
I hope you understand in this day and age. Before I answer that question, first of all, let me thank you for hosting and organizing this human rights conference and for drawing attention to the issues surrounding immigration and immigrants and immigrant families. It's such an important issue to all of us. But before I get started, I think I would be remiss if I did not mention the extraordinary events of the last 24 hours and the guilty verdict in Minnesota in the trial of Derek Chauvin, and how as a country we've had to give a lot of thought to criminal justice reform, race, racism, hate and discrimination, anti-Asian hate crimes and bias, and of course, the murder and death of George Floyd. And I just want to say to everybody listening, I think there's a lot of relief today in our country, but we may have achieved some measure of accountability yesterday, but I think it's important for all of us to recognize that there's very little justice. George Floyd is still dead. His family will never get him back. Their lives will never be the same. The people of Minnesota and that state will forever bear this pain and this trauma. And all that we have is the hard work that lies ahead on justice, on providing justice, and on overcoming hate and racism in our country, which is the #1 domestic terror threat that we face. That's what the FBI says. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because it has a lot to do with the question about immigration, right? And of course, when we have a conversation about immigration and the public policy challenges that we face in constructing a more fair and more just, justice is a big part of the immigration conversation. You have to confront racism and hate and xenophobia and otherizing of people and objectification and all the difficult issues that come together in our present, not just in immigration, but in the death of George Floyd and in so many other public policy challenges, housing, right? Education, taxation. There are common threads. And that's one of the reasons why I engage in the work of trying to improve our immigration system. in trying to protect immigrants and immigrant families because it's so interconnected and because it's so personal. So it is almost trite to say that we are a nation of immigrants, but we are. And many of us have very recent immigration experiences. My parents are immigrants. I was born in Hartford Hospital. And the reason I think that I really engage in this work is because it's so personal, because it's so real and visceral for me. And let me just put that into focus. When President Trump first said that he wanted to denaturalize American citizens, it quickly occurred to me that naturalized American citizens include my parents. So he was talking about taking away their citizenship. And then when he went a step further and questioned birthright citizenship and called the American born children, the native born children of immigrants, he called them anchor babies. It quickly occurred to me that he was talking about me. I'm an anchor baby. I'm a proud son of immigrants who are naturalized American citizens. And so I think it's extraordinarily important to recognize that this is very personal for all of us. And you don't have to look very far in many of our family histories, even if you're a generation two removed from it, to see how much the immigrant experience has impacted you and your life and your family.
So true. Yeah, coming from a family of immigrants myself, I think that much of what you said, excuse me, resonates very deeply with me. And seeing what's coming out in the chat, I think that I'm not alone here, in saying that, we're all very grateful for the work that you do, but we also share much of the motivation that drives you, and we appreciate that as students. I'm also seeing quite a number of additional questions. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Tong, we'd love to start to get through as many of these as we can. How does that sound?
Sure. Sounds
All
great.
right.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so let's see what we have up. Eric writes, my parents are immigrants from Cambodia, and I've always cared about immigrant rights, but I don't really know what I can do to help. What can students do to support the rights of immigrants in Connecticut?
So there are a number of ways that students can help. Obviously, there's the public policy approach, which is working on proposals to reform the immigration system, contacting your congressmen and senators, working with advocacy organizations. That's one way you can do it. I don't want to take away from that work. That's extraordinarily important work. But I would suggest there may be a more important way that you can help, because there's already a lot of people working on the policy. In Stamford, we have a organization called Building One Communities, which provides direct services to immigrant families, job training, helping with job searches, helping people who are undocumented and may have been cheated out of pay by somebody they worked for, worker justice, tutoring, English as a second language, consumer issues, and just trying to help people navigate your utility bill or travel issues, when you have limited English language proficiency or maybe just don't have access to a computer. Building One Communities does all of that, and it provides a safe space for immigrants. I would argue that is an incredibly important place to focus your time and energy and can change people's lives. Just be there for immigrant families in your community and help them, because there's no end of need for help. And I think about my parents, maybe Irene, you think about yours when they first got here. It would have been so much better if somebody were there for them and gave them a hand and helped them navigate when they had to go get their social security card or go to DMV, right? Or register kids for school, or just there's so many ways in which, I mean, the beauty of immigrants is that we make it happen. We just figure it out, but sometimes it's a lot harder than it needs to be. So that would be where I would suggest people help. And then of course people that are under attack, um, when you find that a family in your community is being targeted for deportation and there's really not a good reason to deport them, I would be there for them and help them and advocate for them. One family at a time, I guess, is my message.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And for everyone in the audience who's looking to get involved, we can include Build on Community in our links on our website, so you can go check it out. You can also get involved with a lot of student organizations on campus, so check out UContact. We'll put a bunch of them on our website if you're looking for that. We also will have a workshop coming up soon after this on knowing your rights, if you are undocumented, so you might want to direct your family towards that. But all really good questions, and I'm seeing one that's rather similar, where Marissa, excuse me, says, several members of my family are undocumented, but getting support can be really expensive. Are there organizations or resources that you would recommend we look into? And I know, Mr. Tong, you just mentioned one. Are there any others that Marissa can look into?
There are, and I don't want to get this wrong, but there's Building One Communities in Stamford. There's Iris in New Haven. I think it's the Immigrant and Refugee something something service. I'm sorry. You're challenging me to get the acronym right. But there are a
Sorry,
couple of
Marissa.
organizations that afterwards, Irene, why don't you follow up with Josh Perry from my office, and we can distribute some names of organizations that people can contact. There is help out there that shouldn't cost you an arm and a leg. Getting a lawyer is really expensive, and really difficult. Uh, Let me also say, as a follow-up to my last point and answer the last question, I've been involved in all of the big litigations involving immigration. The Muslim ban, our office was involved in the Muslim ban, the census question, um, Dreamers and DACA, and that tremendous victory that we won in the Supreme Court. All of that work extraordinarily important. Not as important to me personally as the work that I have done helping and saving specific actual Connecticut families from deportation. And I'm talking about the Walton family, the Thompson family, um, the Huang family. These are all families, real people that live in our community, in our state, and their lives were at risk. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. So as I said before, if you can help somebody, if you want to work on a policy level, great, do it. But if you could help somebody directly, you should do that. Let me also say to people that have undocumented parents or who are themselves dreamers, don't be afraid to ask for help. And my parents, my dad was at one point undocumented, and he asked for help and he got it. And I know it was very scary during President Trump's tenure to ask for help. But you really need to, in a safe way, try to find people to help you. Don't hide in the shadows. There are resources in this state to help you, and we'll make sure that we get you all the information that you need.
Absolutely. And you're at a university where there are additional resources. Again, look at our website. We'll have a lot on there, and we'll follow up with Mr. Tong's office. We'll get some of those resources out to you. But thank you, Marissa, for your question. That was a really good one. Lily now asks, Attorney General Tong, how, if at all, can students get involved specifically with the work that you do?
You can intern. So we have a robust internship program. It's been a little tough with COVID because the building is closed. but we otherwise welcome interns from UConn, have lots of interns, undergrad and law school interns, and other school interns, whatever UConn program you're in, feel free to reach out. Peter Brown runs our internship program, and we'll get you his contact, and we would love for you to come join our office and work with us.
All right, Lily, you heard him. Go intern. We'll include a link to that on our website or maybe on the YouTube link afterwards. Thank you, Lily, for your question. Now, Brian writes, my parents recently became citizens, but during the process of acquiring citizenship, I noticed that there was a lot of misinformation out there about immigration and citizenship. Are there any common myths that you have found in your own work?
Immigrants, common myths, hard to catalog what the myths are. I think a common problem we have is that recent citizens and recent immigrants are at risk of being scammed. And I think the most important thing is if you hire a lawyer and hire counsel to assist you with your immigration application, or if you have an immigration case that requires a lawyer, make sure you really research who you're working with. Unfortunately, in many immigrant communities, there are people who promise you the moon, that they can help you, and they may be from your own community, and they may be recommended to you by a friend or by family. That doesn't mean they're good, and that doesn't mean they're legit. And you really have to do your research and make sure that you're comfortable with who represents you and who's giving you advice. And I would encourage you to call your local legal services organization, your local legal aid organization. And even if they can't help you or offer you representation, they can recommend somebody reputable to you. And that's the most important thing. I would just say, with all due respects to people's cousins and second cousins, right? I love second cousins, but I wouldn't ask them to represent me in court.
Neither would I.
So just kidding, cuz. All I would say is ask for help, but make sure that help is reputable and
I guess when
experienced.
as a follow-up to that, are there any signs that immigrant families can look for to sort of get a sense that they might be getting scammed?
Yeah, a lot of they ask for a lot of cash up front. They make promises about that they can deliver things that other people have trouble, getting. Like, I can get you citizenship in 60 days, or I can make a phone call to Senator Blumenthal and make it all go away. That kind of thing, that's sort of a red flag. By the way, and I would encourage the students to do this, maybe look at every law school in the region. And there may be law schools that have clinics. Yale has a clinic, for example, where law students, under the supervision of a law professor, are providing services. So I would also consider going to law schools and seeing if you can get help there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I think that UConn Law has one as well. So if I'm wrong, that's my fault, but go look into that because I think that they do. So definitely a really great point. Let's see, our next question, and by the way, thank you, Brian, for your question. Daniela asks, how, if at all, has your work with immigration been affected by the pandemic?
So obviously, mechanically, logistically, it's been hard to connect with people, to physically be in person and support them. I think the pandemic has really complicated the question of immigration, particularly after President Trump called it the China virus or the Kung flu and blamed Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders for the virus and the pandemic. And so what was already a difficult public policy challenge in reforming our immigration system, now you have so much anger and hate directed not just at Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders that live here and are probably citizens, but just at immigrants broadly. And this idea, the most hateful voices say that immigrants bring in disease, right? And that we're undemocratic and that we are bad influences on our communities. All those hateful stereotypes, they're not even stereotypes, they're just hateful, period, about immigrants. All that gets supercharged when the President of the United States gives voice to that hate.
Definitely true. Unfortunate. Um, Thank you, Daniela, for your question. A good one. Jordan asks, have this year's racial tensions impacted your work on immigration here in Connecticut? And if so, how? And I think you've touched on
So,
a little bit, but if you, yeah.
uh, uh, well, which is why I talked about George Floyd at the beginning. They're all connected, and I think it's really important to recognize how connected they are for a number of reasons. One, because this is very personal for all of us. You know, the death of George Floyd matters to you and me, Irene, right? And it matters to me because there are Asian Americans who find themselves on the wrong side of um, of law enforcement and may be subjected to um, unjust or unlawful violations of their civil rights. When the Huang family in Farmington was at risk of being deported, and thankfully they are still here, my sister, who's a journalist, sent me a text forwarding the story about the Huangs. And her message was simply, that could easily be us. I think it's important to always remember that. You see some family down the street in trouble, that could easily be us. And though I cannot for a second pretend that I know what it would have been like to walk in George Floyd's shoes, there are elements of his and his family's experience that all people of color share and that immigrants share. The second point is not only is it personal, it's also critical to recognize how similar we are. And that's how we build coalitions and find allies and just invest in this work and in each other. Despite the fact that um, I may have grown up, in the Hartford area and in a Chinese restaurant with my family, and that experience maybe has nothing to do with the experience of a Latino family in Stamford. Actually, if you start talking about your experiences, you find out that there are a lot of common threads, right? The immigration experience. Maybe somebody in your family was undocumented. Maybe somebody in your family, you know, was running from a threat to their personal safety in their native country, right? Maybe it's someone in your family, the first one in your family came here because they had a chance to study here, right? There's just a lot of, somebody in your family runs a restaurant, right? Or your Uncle Michael worked in a Chinese restaurant. There are so many ways in which, if you just start talking about your experience, Irene, I bet if you and I just talked for like 10 minutes about how our families came um, to be here, right? Half that story is going to be the same.
I'm sure, yeah.
Even if it happened at a different time, different place, it's the same experience. And that
Absolutely.
is what I think is beautiful about our country. And let me just say this, it's not easy right now to feel good about what's happening. I get that. I am as weighed down as everybody else by the pandemic. Uh, and I'm sure there's going to be some kind of like pandemic stress disorder that we're all going to that we're all experiencing, but the pandemic, George Floyd, anti-Asian hate, all the stuff that we're reckoning with. But I'm still really lucky to be an American. And I would much rather be an American than a citizen of any other country. And it's because of the beauty of our diversity and the strength of our diversity. And that, frankly, makes us stronger than any other country in the world and makes us more economically competitive than any other country in the world. And so, as much as like the first half hour is talking about things that may be negative and difficult, they also, the flip side of that, are wonderful and beautiful about our nation.
So nicely said. I know I'm definitely feeling inspired after this conversation. I'm seeing from the chat that I'm definitely not alone there either. In the few minutes that we have left, then, Mr. Tong, would you be able to quickly just give us a few words of advice for students who are watching out there who maybe are feeling inspired to go out there and make some change? What do you have to say for those students, for the people in our audience, for the residents of Connecticut?
There are so many ways to do this.
Hmm.
And there are two pieces of advice that I would give you, even beyond immigration, right? But to all of you that are looking to make change, to make impact, to quote some famous people, to live a purpose-driven life, right? That's what we're trying to do. That's what you're in school to do. That's why we're having this conversation. Two things that I think have really helped me. Number one is you need experience. And I think in this day and age, sorry, my phone's ringing. It's too easy to join the gold rush for internships and graduate degrees and that first job. And I'm going to go intern for the Attorney General. And by the way, I just told you to intern for me, but like, you should do more than that. And to build that resume, everyone's doing that. And ironically, if you do what everyone else is doing because everyone feels like they have to do it, that makes you unremarkable. Right? If you think about it. And I will tell you a quick story. When I was interviewing for my first year law school summer job. No, second year law school summer job. Second year law school is when you get your job. That's the moment that you hopefully get a job for when you graduate. And I had a wonderful experience. My first year summer, I interned for Nina Totenberg at NPR. She's the national legal affairs correspondent. She's a giant in the law. And I spent my summer covering impeachment and Monica Lewinsky, the Clinton impeachment. And that summer, Nina Totenberg's husband died, and they were a fixture in Washington, D.C., and a number of Supreme Court justices came over to her house to visit and, pay their respects to her husband. And I got to be there for all of that. And so when I interviewed for my second year job, I talked about Nina Totenberg and meeting Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her living room. And I didn't recognize it then, but that helped me stand apart from the rest of the people who were applying for jobs, because I was able to have an interesting conversation. But if I didn't have that experience and I had worked in the Attorney General's office or I interned in a law firm, right, in Hartford, or I was a paralegal, all those are good experiences, but everyone's doing that. Right. And if I'm interviewing somebody for a job or an experience, some sort of opportunity, I'm like, all right, tell me something different about you. So my advice is get out there when you graduate. Don't go to law school right away. Take a couple years off if you want to go to law school or graduate school. Do something meaningful. Join the Peace Corps. Go to Africa. Go to Asia. Go to Latin America. Go to Appalachia, right, in America. Go somewhere and serve and live and be a young person and make mistakes and do stupid things and have a story to tell. That, I think, is so much more powerful when you are applying for that first or second or third job, or when you're running for Attorney General. I draw on those experiences every day. The second thing I would say is you have to seek out mentors. And for those of you who are sons and daughters of immigrants or people of color, don't expect your mentors to look like you. Chances are they won't. Especially if you're a first. I'm the first Asian American elected at the state level in Connecticut's history, which means before I ran, there was nobody. And my mentor was the mayor of Stamford. Mayor of Stamford became the governor of Connecticut. And my relationship with Dan Malloy was a very personal one for a long time, where he took the time to give me good advice, criticize me, beat me up a little bit, make fun of me, right? Tell me I was smart, tell me I was stupid, right? And you need that. You need that. And so my advice is find mentors, impose yourself on your mentors, and what I mean by that is you gotta be annoying. Like, will you have lunch with me? Will you have breakfast with me? Can you give me your advice on this? Don't make it always about you, by the way. It's a two-way street. And having a mentor also means helping them too in whatever way that you can. But I cannot tell you how incredibly important that is. And you may decide that you want a mentor and that mentor just doesn't have time or isn't the right mentor, then move on to another one. But find people who will give you time and invest in you. I'm sure for all of you, there's somebody.
Beautifully said. Attorney General William Tong, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. For those of you in the audience, thank you for joining us in this space and for being so engaged in the conversation with your wonderful questions and comments. Another thank you to Michael Cerulli, who's joining us here. Thank you for making this possible. Up next, join us at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a Know Your Rights workshop presented by students from the University of Connecticut Law School. The workshop is open to the public, and it aims to educate allies and use the resources that we're privileged to have at our disposal to provide those in our state who may be at risk of deportation with a way to know the rights they're entitled to. Attorney General William Tong, thank you again for your presence and for your time.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to end the live stream. Thank you all for joining us.